Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Corcoran, Vice President of Education at the New York Botanical Garden. It is a delight to welcome you to today's very special lecture with our guests, Dan Pearson and Midori Shintani. Dan and Midori will be talking about their amazing book at the Tokachi Millennium, their amazing work at the Tokachi Millennium Forest, which is the subject of this beautiful and elegant book. Today's event is truly a global gathering across multiple time zones. Dan is speaking from London, Midori joins us from Japan, where it's quite late in the evening, and you, our audience, from around the world and across the US. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to participate in today's event. Our education manager, Jason Griffith, is facilitating things behind the scenes. If you want to make a comment during the presentation, use the chat button. And if you'd like to ask Dan or Midori a question directly, please use the Q&A feature. Also, if you see an interesting question pop up in the Q&A, you can like it. Liked questions automatically flip to the top of the list and will be asked first. So Dan Pearson is about as renowned as a designer and gardener can be. He's a longtime friend of the New York Botanical Garden, has spoken here many times, so we're thrilled to have him back with us today. Midori Shintani trained in horticulture and landscape in Europe and Japan, and has been head gardener of Tokachi Millennium Forest since 2008. Today, they'll be talking about the forest, the vision behind it, and their remarkable collaboration there. Tokachi Millennium Forest is inspiring and unique, both in its ambition and its execution. In his foreword to the book, Fergus Garrett called it profoundly restorative, and quite simply, the most complex, rich, and dynamic piece of design he's ever seen. It's on such a grand scale, a conservation park of almost 1,000 acres with a plan to be sustainable for at least the next 1,000 years. So if you want to reconnect with the ecological life of the land, this forest and this book will speak to you. What's fascinating to me is the partnership between Dan and Midori, each with their very different backgrounds and talents, but also one that continues, with Midori on the ground as the active and indispensable steward of their shared vision. We've had so many designers speak here at the garden over the years, and I can tell you that this sort of sensitive, continued involvement between designer and horticulturist is rare and special. Today, Dan will lead off and then bring on Midori, and afterwards we'll rejoin you and get to your questions. So let's get started. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dan Pearson.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for that wonderfully generous introduction. And thank you, everybody, for joining us to talk about the Millennium Forest, which is the most extraordinary project and one that is very close to my heart, and one that we feel is very worth sharing because it's a very visionary project that was set up in the 90s when Mr. Hayashi, the owner, bought this piece of land with a view to offsetting his newspaper business. He's a newspaper owner. And that was a visionary move at that point. And we have been very lucky to be involved as a practice, Dan Pearson Studio, since 2000. And I felt it was important to write a book that captured this wonderful place so that we could share it beyond the boundaries of Hokkaido itself. It's remote, it's wonderful for being remote, but the messaging behind it is something which works on a worldwide level, particularly now when we are looking and have to be looking very closely at our relationship with nature and the world and our custodians of land and landscape and nature. So this is a very magical project because it allows us to reconnect on a very big time frame and to look at the world through this lens of first of all, a garden and a landscape, which we are preserving very gently and very carefully in Hokkaido. So Hokkaido is in the very, very north of Japan. It's a separate island from Honshu, the mainland. And Obihiro is our nearest landing point if you are going to fly there. And the Millennium Forest sits down in this lower part of the island. And you can see how close we are to Russia. This is a landscape of pioneers. It was only colonized in the late part of the 1800s, first of all for logging and then for agriculture. The landscape is rich. The habitat was empty. And there was an Inuit tribe there called the Ainu, who assimilated themselves with the people who moved there. And now the landscape is one which is used for agriculture and for forestry. And there is no surprise, of course, that the hand of man has been pretty hard on the land. And this is one of the things which we're hoping to address, or have had to address, or had the opportunity to with the Millennium Forest. So when I first went there in the year 2000, I was invited to give a lecture in Sapporo by Takano, who was the original landscape architect who was based in Hokkaido, who was already working on this project. And he was working with Mr. Hayashi, and they had come up with a vision to preserve this piece of land for 1,000 years, which is an extraordinary piece of rhetoric in a way, because what does that mean? And when I was asked to be involved to add a garden layer, a more intimate layer to the park, which had been set up in a kind of rudimentary way, really, with access to landscape, but not the intimacy it needed, I was given this long-term vision, and we talked about it and took the vision of sustainability for 1,000 years to be all about education. And one of the things we've wanted to do is to educate people through steering them towards a better nature connection. All over the world, we've become disconnected from nature. Of course, we are part of it, but we see ourselves as fundamentally being separate, which is wrong. And what we want to do through allowing people this greater connection to this piece of landscape is to make them feel part of a place, make them see it again with new and refreshed eyes. And the gardens are part of that, and the gentle steering of the landscape that happens in the orbit around the gardens and allows you the connection with the truly wild landscape beyond, are how we're allowing people this nature connection. So this is the site when I first went there. It's considerably bigger than this now, but you can see agriculture on the plains from the northwest, eroding really the landscape, all clearances, and then the forestry going up into the mountains, and forestry removing the large oak trees and replacing that with larch and shorter growing crops. And Mr. Hayashi wanted us to really look at arresting that erosion of this landscape and looking at rewilding this place and allowing it to come back into its own. So this is a landscape that is dominated by winter. This is the most profound season. And here you can see here the Hidaka Mountains, and then some of that forestry coming down into the foreground, and the original forests where it's impossible to log higher up in the landscape. And that is a landscape where there's an original flora, there are bears in the woods, it's a wild and truly wonderful place. And what we've tried to do is to invite that wild place down into the places which have already been hit by man, by this reforestation and agriculture. And here you can see those forests in the winter. The winter starts at the end of October, early November, and Midori is only just now seeing the very first things coming through after snowmelt So it's a very long and hard winter going down to -25 degrees. A spectacular season where everything becomes monochromatic, and then a concertinaed growing season where everything happens very quickly. One of my ways in, when I was looking at the garden master plan, which was the layer that I worked on to introduce this intimacy into the park, was to look at things that were shared languages that would allow people, the Japanese people who would be using the park, to be able to interact with the land in a way that was recognizable. And one of the things that was very marked in Japan, is this culture of satoyama, which is about living closely with the land and only taking as much as you need from it. And this image really captures that. So in the foreground, you'll have your crops that you need. You'll have the little conurbation of buildings with their more intimate garden spaces around them. And then the forest beyond that, which is harvested very gently for everything that you need for building materials. And the further away you get into the landscape, the less impact you have upon it. So it's about living in tune with the landscape. And we took the idea of Satoyama really to underpin all the things and all the moves that we did to make these garden places and places that are managed in the forest at the Millennium Forest. Other things, of course, that were very relevant to the way that we could approach this project was the discipline of nature worship and that understanding nature in a way that is very particular in Japan, and the reverence for it, which of course comes through the observation of animism, where objects and things which not in the West would not normally be given a spiritual power of their own are acknowledged for having their own presence and their own spirit and their own point of observation and reverence. So those things became very key to the way that we interacted with the landscapes. The boulders became significant. Mr. Hayashi pointed out the importance of them to me very, very early on in the site. He said he believed they had a very strong and profound presence and that they brought the power of the mountain into the landscape. And here you can see Midori here in the woodland. And the wild plants here are truly wonderful. That short growing season where everything happens and the forest floor erupts brings all these incredible things into focus. And one of the things that we've wanted to do is to allow people to get close to these things and to stop them feeling as removed as they have been through living in predominantly urban lives. So this is the landscape master plan that my studio worked on in the early 2000s, looking at a series of spaces which come together to form a connective route which has small orbits of intimacy, larger walks into landscape, landscape connections through visual links out into landscape, and then walks which take you right out into the truly wild places. And it's a process of seduction, really. So the moment you get out of the car or the coach that you've been arrived in, you're taken straight into the woods. And the woods are a place that have been managed very, very carefully. And this is one of Midori's important projects. So the woods, I'm sorry about these sirens. The woods have been taken over by a bamboo called sasa and pioneer species such as birch after those first clearances of the oak trees. And the sasa is like a blanket that just erases all the other diversity in the forest floor. And what Takano had found through experimentation was that by strimming the sasa, weed whacking it in the autumn, the growing season is very, very short. So the sasa had a very short time to regrow the next year. And over a process of about 5 years, you can diminish the impact of the sasa to such a point that the indigenous seed bank, which is sitting in the soil and has been resting there for all those years, starts to come back. And you then get these incredible happenings in the woods where you have one layer of natural vegetation being superseded by the next. The interdependency of all those plants can be allowed to rejuvenate with this very gentle management. So the first place you come into, the forest garden, is a kind of heightened natural woodland with this very gentle management of the sasa, opening up some clearances to allow light to fall on the forest floor, and then a series of walkways which move through these beautiful glades where there are a lattice work of these fast running streams that move alongside little wooden walkways. And as you move through this forest, you start to see all these extraordinary combinations of things that are providing you with form and texture and continuity and interdependency, and things which are edible, things which the Inuit people, for instance, and the Japanese people know well to be things that can be foraged from the forest. And plants which, from the West, for my eyes, I was so delighted to find. Cardiocrinums stepping through the forest in armies of these creamy, scented, amazing cardiocrinums that just move through. Here we have the native aruncus and aconites and lilies, hostas, arizemas, aquilegias, a whole number of things which are all native to those forests. And we wanted to draw people's attention to all this magic and wonder and allow people to reset their eyes so that they could have dwell spaces close to these things that were happening, and allow people to see the magic that was sitting there in front of them. One of my first projects when we arrived there was to address what happened when you got out of that first woodland garden and were faced with a large open 5 hectare, 20 hectare-ish, 20 acre-ish field, which was a clearance, a paddock, which separated you effectively from your view of the mountains. I'd been studying Japanese gardens through going backwards and forwards, and I knew about this wonderful discipline of sheke, the appreciation of the borrowed view. So I wanted to bring this view back into the experience because people were stopping at the little restaurant which sat on the edge of the woodland and going no further. So I designed this large landform by looking at the rolling shapes of the hills and brought those shapes down into a recontoured landscape in front of the restaurant that allowed you this opportunity. You can just see the restaurant in this position left here. This opportunity to re-engage with that landscape. And what's interesting is that the children are the people that venture into this place first because it's playful. We hadn't planned for that, but what happens is that the kids will run to the top of one of these mounds, which are nearly 5 meters, sometimes 20 feet tall, and they'll slide down the mound and find themselves at the bottom and run up the next one, and slowly they'll make their way out into the landscape. The adults will then follow them and then find themselves right out on the very edge of this landform and ready to take a wild woodland walk. So we've acclimatized people into this landscape through enticing them into it with this landscape move. And what's interesting about these places is that the convex shapes and the concave shapes have very different acoustic values. The shapes that push out into the landscape capture the sound of the streams to either side. The shapes that hold you in a bowl capture the sound and the stillness of the mountains. So it's a very sensual experience moving through them, and to work with people's senses in this way is a very subliminal way of grounding people, making them feel part of a place, making them feel comfortable. We also have things which make them feel comfortable because they recognize plants which they may not know how those things look actually in the ground. Vegetables which they've only ever seen in a vegetable shop, flowers which they've never seen growing on a plant. So we have a productive garden, very close to the homestead. Again, looking at that discipline of Satayama with those productive things being near the buildings where there's a little cafe, for instance. And then we have a series of gardens which sit around those little buildings, cluster of buildings, with the stock beds. And here you can see Midori and her team working away in the stock beds. There's a little goat farm where goat cheese is made with the animals brought right close up so that you can see them, and an orchard just in the background. And then close in, the most cultivated of all the plants, a small rose garden for those people that might find the wild places too much, but recognize a garden through something that everybody knows to love, which is a rose. So in a way, this is the little crowd pleaser. It's the thing which all sorts of people can relate to. But then we've made other moves which are a lot more subtle, that allow us to look at nature through combining the wild plants and the native plants together. And this is the nature table which Midori stocks throughout the year with seasonal changes. In Japan, there is this wonderful discipline of the 72 seasons. So every 5 days, there is a slightly different season described in a new calendar or their own calendar. And true enough, if you look at a year by staying in one place, as some of us have for the last year, every 5 days there's this very gentle shift. And she captures that with fruits and vegetables and flowers and wild plants that all come together on those nature tables to allow people the opportunity to look at things very intimately, very closely. And that sits alongside the Meadow Garden, which is our big gesture. And the Meadow Garden is a combination of the Japanese plants, which we have already seen in the forest floor, some of those things which I've shown you in the lecture already, and then Western style plants, and used in a way, a very, very naturalistic way, so that they feel like they're the forest floor. You come out of the forest floor and the forest continues into an uber meadow, an open glade that sits in this clearing with light pouring into it, where the Japanese plants can be seen alongside things which people might usually expect to see in a garden. And through those things being combined, people can start to look at the things which are underneath their noses with a very different new set of eyes. And it's a way of starting to get to see people, to show people a relaxed form of horticulture that invites the wild plants, but sees them as equal as the cultivated plants. And this is the plans showing these great swathes of plants that sit together in these combinations of things that we try to make as self-sustaining as possible. This is the main pathway that moves through the middle. You can see the forest on the right, and off to the left there are the Hidaka Mountains and the landforms just behind, and this big path that moves through an area on the right, which is designed to feel cool and damp. And as you rise up to the left, it's higher and drier, and the color becomes brighter. And the idea with the garden is that it's completely immersive. And I wanted people to walk into this space and feel like they were lost in nature, lost in an Uber version of it. So you would be walking along these tiny little tracks, like animal tracks through a woodland, and find yourself alongside plants which might at some points be towering way above you. And by creating these immersive environments, we've made a series of places within the garden where things happen that you might not expect. There are distinct color fields that happen within this space. So you move from a palette of plants which might be green and white and gently mauve on the edge of the forest through into pinks, hot pinks, indigo blues in the middle of the garden, and then up into much hotter, brighter colors that are isolated by these big bands of Calamagrostis grasses. And because the season is so short, we have an incredible explosion of nectar with all these plants coming together, Western style introductions alongside the Japanese plants. And Midori sends me these little haikus from time to time, or emails which are like haikus. One day she said, "Today everybody is screaming." I couldn't work out why. I thought something awful had happened. But it was because there'd been these extraordinary explosions of swallowtail butterflies, which had come in clouds to gather the nectar from the garden. And people were just surprised to be moving through the garden, and there'd be these great clouds of swallowtail butterflies moving through. So it becomes a kinetic piece, something that is constantly changing. Every 5 days, it's a different place because the combinations of plants are moving through each other. And we want the garden to feel very much like the forest floor, with one thing being superseded by another in a series of layers which echo and ape those plant communities in the forest floor. But throughout the garden, there are these moments where you just break that spell. So here we have the river of yarrow, for instance. So this is Achillea, coronation gold, swooping in this great big river through the yellow area. And that is here on the left, seen in its silvery form, just with the first colors coming out. And then the Cephalaria gigantea just rising up in that image on the left. And then in their full flower on the right, growing to almost 3 meters and rising, towering right above you. So you're completely immersed in this planting. Here you can see the Calamagrostis Carl Förster stepping through the garden and separating these color fields, always borrowing the views. You can't tell where the garden begins or ends with the rapid vegetation we've brought round to slightly separate the Hedaka Mountains, but always refer to them as your reference point. Here with Eupatorium stepping through the garden in great big huge stands like giants moving through that sea of Persicaria. And here that section in the center of the garden, having changed in late summer from the mauves, the nepitas, to the heat of late summer with this Persicaria taking over and changing the tone and the energy in the garden towards the end of the summer. Midori and I, in a normal year, would be meeting up every year at various different points within the year. Midori is an incredibly important part of what makes the Millennium Forest runs. She is on the ground on a daily basis, observing, making notes, steering gently, understanding this very fine balance, working closely in the forest with the balance in the forest, and then taking the memory of that balance in the forest through into this perennial planting, which is managed in a slightly more meticulous fashion, but very much with that memory of the forest in mind. So I'm allowed to go back by Mr. Hayashi, our generous host and client, once a year at different times, and Midori and I will workshop the garden and steer it very gently. The garden is never finished. We've just completed our first decade in this garden, just the very first window of that 1,000 years. And already the garden has showed us these wonderful changes that happen. In 2016, there was a typhoon which swept through, and the energy of the garden changed as a result. It took Midori 3 months of repairs, and then next year things surprisingly changed and moved in a different way. We then had to adapt to that movement in the garden. And as gardeners and custodians of that place, this is what we need to do to allow this interaction and this place that people can start to see nature through the tended spaces, through the garden spaces, and through that care and attention, which allows people to feel part of something much bigger. So here is the garden just as it's been cut down in the autumn. Midori has to do all her work at the very end of the season before spring comes, because spring is so fast. There's not the time that we might have in England, for instance, to keep on gardening until the very last minute. And in most years, the snow has to be broken in April by spreading soot to help thaw it. And here is Midori and her team doing that. They haven't had to do that this year, she was just saying. So a magical place. I'm now going to let Midori take over and talk to you about this project, which we have been so very pleased to be part of and are very pleased to be sharing with you. The book we felt was an important move to make, to capture something of this place and to spread the word and to really try and communicate the importance of working with the land and working with nature through gardening it and listening to it and being the careful custodian. So Midori, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dan. Now I'd like to introduce the forest and our days in the garden to you all. Sorry, yeah. Okay. I've started living in Hokkaido and making a garden at the Millennium Forest since 2008. And even in a part of Japan, Hokkaido has unique climate and vegetation and wildlife. And I met the community of native plants and insects, the wild animals, and a new type of colleagues like this in the house and the animals. And of course, in a garden design created by Dan and Takano Landscape Planning has been absolutely new challenge in Japanese garden culture, which has a mission to dramatically connect people to nature by gardening our hands. I hadn't cared much about mountain blizzard before I moved to Hokkaido, but now this breaking winter is essential how we start our gardening season. The gardening in wild nature never been straightforward, but it gives us an irreplaceable bond to the land. Sometimes we realize that we can plant vegetables in the garden when the wild cuckoos they start singing in the forest, and that telling us to the frost eventually stops. Through the adventurous, delightful gardening experiences, I have been overwhelmed by strengths of plants again and again, and gradually come to think to cultivate our gardener's ethos deeper at Tokachi Millennium Forest. Especially, I am keen to learn from Japanese tradition and harmonize our mother culture and our modern gardening. Since ancient times, Japanese have believed that innumerable divine dwelling in every element of nature, like sky, trees, plants, streams, stones, and even little creatures like cicadas. Tiny, delicate changes occur around us through the year. To cherish such natural phenomena is deeply rooted to us. Nature worship has been influenced and developed to our culture in every way. Dan mentioned about Satoyama and 72 season, but today I'll introduce those two sources of inspiration for our gardening, and one of them is Satoyama. Sato means village, Yama means mountain. You can see the photograph, Japanese archipelagos originally covered by dense forest. Therefore, our ancestors had to cut into the steep mountains to create space for a living and agricultural site. They also collected various food stocks, medicines, and housing materials from the forest behind the village. In some regions, our ancestors took the natural resources too much, but through the mistakes that they made, they eventually learned to build up the ideal balance and harmonious relationship between nature and mankind. Satoyama, particular zone of the forest that our ancestors utilized, were developed beautifully as secondary forest in Japan. Here at Tokachi Millennium Forest, we have 270 hectares secondary forest. And we utilize some parts of the forest like our ancestor did. For example, every spring when we thin the young forest, we harvest materials for plant supports at the same time. In autumn, we harvest reed grasses before deep, heavy snow crushes them, stock them, and utilize them for thatching a roof of our office house like this. We harvest the food stocks from our kitchen garden. At the same time, we collect mountain vegetables, especially vigorous native species like Petasites, Fallopian, Metusia from the forest. And all harvest is united to sandwiches at Garden Cafe. And everything returned to the land at the end. We make a house homemade the compost by using the rice bran and fallen leaves and garden works waste and horse manure. So recycling is the most important theme in our garden. Another thing that we garden with is 72 seasons that Dan mentioned earlier. In ancient time, a lunar calendar was used, but it gradually caused differences of the position of sun and the date on the calendar. So our ancestors divided a year into 24 different seasons based on Chinese calendar. Then to live with more delicate changes in nature, the 24 periods was then divided into 3 more to create the 72 seasons calendar. You can see here the example, for example, that each of the 72 seasons shift about 5 days, and the name of each season beautifully capture the moment. For example, today is a season of thunder raises its voice. So now let's take a look quickly with this calendar and the Tokachi Millennium Forest all together. A lot of Japanese people enjoy Hanami, the cherry blossom festival, especially in mainland and the south of Japan. In Hokkaido, snow eventually starts melting on our land. We start sowing seeds of vegetables and cutting flowers in greenhouse. When the geese begin their moving, I cannot stay inside of the house any longer. Every day I bend over to the forest floors. I feel full of joy by meeting new growing season. We just have this yellow flower is Adnis amlarta amaranthus, and we just have them just started blooming this week. And soon after that plant's magical movement, earthworms rise, and our long-awaited cherry blossoms eventually come out. In Meadow Garden, the meltwater had gone and the soil is ready to have us gardeners again. The first edit of naturalistic planting mix begins from thinning and making a stock plant. Our iris starts blooming as the calendar announces. Then gardener's table is also celebrating the iris moment. At this time of the year, the plants grow rapidly in the short summer season of Hokkaido. Meadow Garden is filled with various textures, colors, and forms. Traditionally, we have wisdom called calling that coolness to survive Japanese hot, humid summer. We welcome our visitors with the sound of hooring, which is that Japanese wind chime in the forest. Meanwhile, the plant spots that we made area are covered by crops in the kitchen garden. In Meadow Garden, we continue to work for making a better balance of the planting mix for futures. Hot, humid summer finished very soon in Hokkaido. As the calendar says, we find white dew on the grass at this time of the year. The air of the garden is shifted to the autumn one. Grasses, this one is Calamagrostis carfosta, that turns golden brown color in the garden. And then our autumn harvest season starts. We collect native plant seed in the forest. Then the garden's table is decorated by a lot of pumpkins, squash, dahlias, and wild grapes. And then we have the autumn celebration called Tsukimi, the Harvest Moon Festival. We harvest miscanthus and decorate them and make rice dumplings and offer them to the moon and appreciate for this year's harvest. When frost falls on the calendar, our land shortly starts freezing. We start cutting back. So this one is maintenance of first floor area that we keep growing native vegetation, a lot of different layers, I can say, in native vegetation. We always cut sasa bamboo back and once a year. In the beginning of a project, like Dan said, explained, we cut the sasa bamboo back twice a year, but now we just cut them back, trim back just once a year. And also we cut perennials back in the Meadow Garden before the mud snow completely covered them. And this work is very important as we can start, the spring work immediately after melting snow as soon as possible. So it's quite important to cut the perennials back. But we miss plants really at this moment, but it's very important to think about the next season. And we also feel the snow. You can see the snow on the top of Hidaka Mountain beyond in the photograph. And we always feel the snow coming down to the garden very soon. So our hands keep moving as quick as possible. And then winter always suddenly arrives like this. When nature gives a peaceful time to both of bears and humans, the land is completely covered by snow. And then at this timing, we all feel completely relieved because we surely finished the winter protection and winter preparation. But when deers shed their antlers in the mountains on the calendar, we clean all over the house to purify. And that is going to be our last work in the year. We also make grass decoration called shimenawa. We usually make shimenawa with rice straw, but we don't cultivate the rice field at Tokachi Millennium Forest, so we use the other ornamental grasses. This one is actually Molinia grasses, and we make the grass decoration for New Year. And we put decorations at where we welcome divine of the New Year, wishing to have another joyful days with the plants in the garden. The mountain blizzard constantly is running through the forest during this dominant winter season. But we all surely carry on toward the next season. We always find the sign of humble nature. Through 72 seasons, we realize ourselves living for a moment as a part of nature. And the season goes around, and we keep nurturing the garden and our sincere devotion to nature. It is quite quick guide of the Tokachi Millennium Forest, but I hope you enjoyed our forest time. Thank you for listening.
Oh, just thank you both, Midori. What a beautiful, lovely images that both of you and Dan shared. Thanks so much for that. So today is the day when thunder raises its voice, according to the calendar. The concepts that you wove in of Satuyama, of Sheke, of the 72 seasons calendar, they were all wonderful. It really gives us hope. I could feel the love of the land and the seasons in your descriptions of the Tokachi Millennium Forest. I want to have a Harvest Moon dinner. It's all wonderful, but the Q&A is filling up. So why don't we get right to it? We have, a nice amount of time to get through what is, quite a few questions. And so we'll start right off the top. This one is always a popular question. Do you have the deer or wild animals that we sometimes have in the North American forests, particularly ones that are newly planted?
Yes, we have a lot of deers and fox and hares and mice and also the grizzly bears. Yes.
Is there issues with them?
Deers in the beginning of a project, the deers, they try to show their territory to the garden, but now they kind of like a step back because we release some area for the wild animals deeper in the forest. Mm-hmm. So there's not so serious problem idea nowadays.
Is the garden open to the public? If so, what are the dates?
When we open the public,
yes,
from the end of April to the end of October.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What, if any, concerns is there about introducing non-native plants into the forest?
What do you think, Dan?
We've been very careful, haven't we, Midori? The Meadow Garden is, we planted a buffer zone all the way around. So there is a shrub layer of dense trees and shrubs, most of which are native actually. And then we just have a bark layer underneath so we can tell if anything is seeding. Mm-hmm. And Midori is very, very careful with anything that has wind-blown seed to cut it down before, such as Valeriana officinalis.
Eupatorium,
Eupatorium.
maculatum.
So they're cut down before they seed, aren't they?
But actually not so serious. We actually worried about that when we make garden. Of course, we should care about that. But actually, there is no problem about non-native. But now we have a lot of native plants try to dominate to Meadow Garden, I mean the perennial garden, and we sometimes the welcome them. Dan very generous to welcome them as a part of the garden design. So he developed his design with native plants, vegetation. So it's a really, really exciting thing to do, actually.
That's great. So Deborah, I'm sorry, Dan, did you want to add to that?
Oh, I was just going to say that one of the plants which jumps in is that giant Angelica, which Midori was standing beside.
It's amazing.
So somebody asked about that very tall flower. Is that not a giant hogweed? But it's just...
It's Angelica ursina, yes, Midori?
Ursina, yeah, Ursina.
Yeah. And then Deborah asks, she is curious about the size of the meadow.
1 hectare, 1.5 hectare, including the shrub area. Yeah.
And when we planted it, the first round of plants that went in there were 35,000 perennials that went in.
Yeah.
Just to give you a sense of scale.
Yeah. Okay. How many visitors each year and how many gardeners work on this park?
Visitors, it's about 60,000 before COVID-19 situation. From the April, from the end of April to the end of October, and we are very, very small number of team. We, including me, full-time gardeners is 4, and 1 seasonal gardener, 2 varieties almost every day, and 1 lawn keeper, field keeper. He is a specialist of the grass, the maintenance. So it's less than 10 people. It's very, very.
That is a small number for all that work that you do. So here's somebody, hello from Athens, Georgia. This person has a background in heritage and the sensory experience of marble sculpture from the quarry to final object. And they ask if you could please share more details on the ways you have allowed people to interact and feel closer with the rock volumes that you, Dan, showed in the earlier slides. Those that bring the mountain back to flatter the landscape.
Yes, when Mr. Hayashi first took me to the landscape, it was before we'd changed very much or opened it up. And he walked me into the forest to show me the erratics, the stones which have been left by the glaciers as it have moved through. And I loved these. He gave these stones a hug. He embraced them because he believes that they, doesn't he, Midori?
Yeah.
And they do have a resonance. So we moved some stones from farmland that had already been moved close to the paths. So we use them as indicators where there might be a break to paths, or as a point for your eye to rest upon, to draw you towards a certain area. So they're wayfinders. And we've also taken, in a couple of instances, we've taken people close to stones that were already there with a path. So some of them have been introduced and are used to articulate movement. And some of them we've articulated our movement to the stone. Right,
interesting. So here's another question from Rebecca. Are you concerned that cutting back perennials in the autumn reduces overwintering habitat for insects?
We often ask that question, but our garden, I mean Meadow Garden, is going to be covered by snow height, like almost 2-meter height. So it doesn't make a good sense for the insects in that case. And also that we cut that back maybe about less than 10 hectares of 400 hectares. So there are just so many places for the insects or wild animals to, survive or keep their living in a natural habitat. Yeah.
Okay, and please describe how you prepare the soil for planting in different areas of the garden.
In Meadow Garden, we have used to organic, the manure because to improve the soil condition. But nowadays we don't do that. We just the mulch and the ground, and that's it. And then in kitchen garden, we recycle, the waste of the cafe, the food waste or the garden work waste. So we make the homemade compost and put in a bed and, the cultivate in every spring. Yes, something like that. In the forest, we don't do anything because the layer of the fallen leaves, make the good soil condition naturally. So we just follow that natural ecosystem.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. Mark asks.
Barbara,
Yes.
just one quick thing to add to that. We don't want to encourage too much growth in the meadow garden because we want things to be growing in as natural way as possible. So we're not.
Sure.
We try to keep them a bit hungry. And the garden, it's just worth noting, Midori runs the garden completely on organic principles. So it's very strict, and it works.
That's wonderful. I like that notion of keeping them a bit hungry.
Yep.
So Mark says, Konbanwa, what type of unusual, I don't know what that means, what type of unusual, unexpected challenges have you encountered along the way? Unexpected challenges you did not expect.
Well, yeah, as I said, the breaking winter by sprinkling charcoal powder is quite unusual in Japan. Also, now we are facing to trying to have a peaceful, the boundary between the grizzly bear and the human's garden area. So we try to bring the horse, the horse paddock in the forest. I mean, like holding the garden and show them, gently show them this is the the buffer area between us each other. So that's quite unexpected gardening, that we do. Yeah, I think so. How about you, Dan?
Sorry, Midori.
Sorry,
when we planted the garden, the idea is that we make these plant communities. So we have maybe up to 10 plants in any one place, different things. And you try and choose plants that you think are going to be in balance with each other and then create this interdependency. And I used a thermopsis, a Japanese thermopsis, which normally, Midori's laughing, when it's growing in a natural community, it has all these other plants that are keeping it in check. Because at the point we planted the garden, it was all new ground. It had all those other companions to keep it in check, and it went crazy. So Midori sent me this wonderful photograph of one plant, and she had dug out one plant and all its roots, and it must have been 3 meters across.
3 meters.
Oh my gosh.
And it was like a nightmare. Unfortunately, if I did not have, if we didn't have Midori on the ground, that garden would now all be thermopsis. And that's a mistake you can make very easily from it.
Oh my gosh, that's right. Well, Midori, I loved what Dan said, that you had all the, you would send him little missives and notes, and people are screaming, and I mean, the reactions to everything must be wonderful. But so here's Judy. She asks, why use cultivars such as Calamagrostis Carl Forster rather than species? Is it the ease of availability?
Nearly all the things that we have used are very close to the species. And the things that we've chosen that are cultivars are good choices. They are good garden plants. They're things which have been already trialed and tested within a garden setting. That have a particularly strong color, a good color. They might be a better flowering form or a stronger form. But we always choose them so that they feel as closely wild, closely connected to their parents as possible. The only place where we're using things that are more cultivated, of course, is in the rose garden and in the cutting garden.
Okay, we're going a little over now, so I'm going to maybe ask you two more quick ones. Here's a real practical one. What is the path material used through the meadow?
The path is gravel of the stone called balkansik, I mean local stone. We just also the large sleepers in the center. I mean center path.
They're larch, so some of the trees which have been taken down from the forest.
Okay. All right. So after the clearance of the bamboo amongst the birch, was there introduction of cultivated species, or was the return of the plants of the forest floor just from the natural seed bank? And how long did that take?
After the cutting back as a bamboo bag, maybe it takes about 5 years the natural vegetation in coming back, and to have a lot of the rich the layers of vegetation. And we have a different method to maintain the forest floor. Like we just leave it to keep. I mean that we put the hands that as less as possible, because we want to keep observing the natural ecosystem, I mean, by their own strength. And also in forest garden, it is a garden with native plants. So we collect the seeds and make plant seedlings and return them to the forest floor to encourage the vegetation. So we have quite different methods, and it depends on the area of the forest floor. Yeah.
We're very strict about that only being native indigenous material. So no introductions. And Midori has these beautiful forest nurseries where she grows plants in the forest, in the native community. You'd hardly know it was there, but you have special things, don't you, that you grow in places where you know they grow well, where you can harvest the seedlings that you've made and taken there, and then take them to places where you think that they will do well, to heighten the mood where you need them to.
Lovely.
It's
so
here's
a
very delicate exercise, and Midori's a master.
That's wonderful. So here's the last question. It's going to take us completely away from Tokachi Millennium Forest. Gabriel asks, please explain the ladder in the picture behind Dan. Is it handmade by Dan?
Well, this is a kind of, Midori and I have all these connections, and one of them is Digster, a Great Digster, and Fergus Garrett, the head gardener of Great Digster, makes these wonderful ladders. And one Christmas, I took my staff from the studio here. We went down, we all made ladders together with Fergus. He taught us how to do it. So it's wood that is taken out of his woods nearby. And we work in his big barn, and we spent the whole day over one Christmas day. And then we had to get them back on the train. So we had I've got 8 team members. So that was 9 ladders, including myself, going back on a train back up to London. It was like a comedy. It was very funny.
Oh, I will have to ask somebody to have it. If we could do a ladder workshop at the New York Botanical Garden sometime, that would be wonderful. Thank you both so much for taking this time. It has been such a pleasure. And to the audience, I know there are many questions still to go that we did not get to. I asked Dan and Midori, and they have very generously said that they will look through the questions that we didn't get to and answer 2 or 3 of them, and we will send those out in an email to you. And a lot of the answers to those questions are in this beautiful book, along with many of the photographs that you saw. Jason in the chat put in the link to NYB Shop where you can purchase the book, or you can come to the garden. You know, next week, April 10th, is the opening of our big spring summer exhibition, Kusama Cosmic Nature, the sculptures of Yayoi Kusama and many of her other types of artwork as well. So please do come for that. Pick up the book at the shop. And again, thank you so much to Dan and Midori. If there's anything less you would like to say, please do.
I would say, Midori, I miss you.
I miss you too.
Well,
a real pleasure.
What a lovely way to end.
And thank you, everybody, for sharing. And if you can ever get to Hokkaido, please try and go, because it's the most wonderful place. Wonderful experience.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take good care. Bye-bye.